Okay, well, I am going to go ahead and kick us off. Thank you for joining us for our Generate version 12.3 office hour. My name is Liz Burnett. I am on the CIID team and essentially am the product owner of Generate, help support the dev team in all of their endeavors. I have with me Johnny Cunningham. He will be doing the bulk of the presentation. Travis, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So today we will be reviewing changes that are being included in the 12.3 release. We will be reviewing some edits we've made to our Generate documentation, doing a quick preview of 12.4, taking a look at our upcoming releases and the dates associated with them, and then we send out, for most of you who have joined, with each of these sessions, we send out a survey. Those surveys are really helpful to us. We use that information to kind of change and, tweak these sessions to better fit the needs of you all and kind of see, what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, how we can make edits. So if you have a few minutes, it's really helpful if you finish those surveys. And then just opening it up for discussion. I know we have number 6 listed as open discussion, but feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions during the presentation, or go ahead and throw some information in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with, or you can wait till the end of the session as well, like it's detailed in the agenda. Next slide. Johnny?
So hello, everybody. My name is Johnny Cunningham. If you're someone that I have not met or haven't worked with yet, I am an ETL developer. I also do Generate implementations and also work on the development of Generate as well. So I hopefully can answer most of the questions that are going to come up today. Okay, so jumping into our sets of changes. So for the IDEA reports, so I wanted to give a quick thank you to New Hampshire and Kentucky. So working with them this year on discipline, we uncovered a couple of bugs in Generate that we needed to resolve, and those were in 6 and 88. So those went out as a hot fix this year for states that were working on discipline. We also found a minor issue in exiting that affected mostly states that had been with, or I should say exclusively, states that had been with Generate for multiple years, because there was an issue with the date logic and how it was handling the LEAs. And there were LEAs from the previous school year that were getting included. So we had to clean up that a little bit. But those were the changes. Those were the only changes to the IDEA reports. And these are actually implementing the hot fix changes that we used or that we created for 12.2. This is actually making them part of the code base for 12.3. This one I'm really excited to talk about. So for the non-IDEA reports, so for Title 37.134, New Mexico this year was working on those were pilot opportunity files. New Mexico took those on, and in our work with them, we were able to get that code working. So we now have support for those 2 files through migration. They show up in the UI. We were able to create a submission file. I think we had a small bug with the metadata on that, so with the submission file, but we now have support for those 2 files. 222 is one of the newer files that had not been developed in Generate. So for that one, New Mexico, Utah, and Kentucky worked on 222, worked on that file, and sort of helped us, work through that new. So sorry, just a little bit of context. For those of you that have been with us for a while, that have used Generate, have done any of the debugging, if you are an EdFacts coordinator, this stuff may not make a lot of sense, and I'm not going to go too deep. But the current process goes through a function called getCountSQL. That's the current migration process to do the report part of the migration. So that last step that actually does the aggregation of the counts and all of that work. That's a little hard to debug, especially if you're a state person trying to, validate your numbers at the end of a file. So we had been working on trying to come up with a better way to do that last step. And we developed a new report migration process that will ultimately replace get counts equal. And we applied it to those new files that we had not developed yet. So 218 through 226 use that new report process. And like I said, Nevada, Utah, and Kentucky were all working on 222. So they helped us work through that new report migration process. And there were other states that did as well, because that was part of the SCIID work too. There was a SCIID work group team that worked on that. So there were other states that contributed to that effort as well. But through that, we were able to test that and we were able to migrate data in. I think the one problem we had with that one was the creation of the submission file that we did not get done in time for 12.2. But we were able to get the rest of that support in. So thank you to those states. That's the Title I changes. So for directory, again, go back to New Mexico. These were two files that they piloted this year, so 131 and 223. And we were able to get the migration code working for those, displayable in the UI. Again, I said submission files, but with a couple of these, we had issues with the metadata that we have to resolve or had to resolve. But those are now available for states if those are something you want to look at, attempting to do. Membership 226 is again one of those new files that goes through that new report migration process. We had a couple of states work on this along with 222. There was a specific group of states that were working through the SCIID work group, and then Kentucky was also working on that one as well. But there was 226 is a very similar file, and the process is the same. So we had a few states work on that one, and so we were able to get that developed as well. And then for assessments, 210 to 11 is something we were working on internally. We were able to get the migration code in place for that, but we are still working on the finalizing the UI and the submission file process for those. But at least in 12.3, you'll be able to migrate data for those two if those are two files you're looking at taking on. So for the user interface, we had these are, I think they're significant, but they're kind of probably minor. So the metadata update process, if you're familiar with Generator, if you're one that uses the UI, we developed a process where you can now update the metadata for your files from within the UI. So it calls an API, pulls down the most recent metadata, and then puts that into Generate so that Generate can access it as it's doing all the file work. One of the problems we ran into with that was the process goes out and gets the most recent set of metadata. So it was pulling down the team that works on that was working on 2025, right? So they're working on the upcoming year's metadata. So it was pulling that metadata down. The problem is it doesn't pull multiple years the way we had it coded, right? So it was pulling 2025. And there were a few files, and this is something we ran into when I mentioned some of those metadata issues on the previous slide, is, Generate may not have had 2024 metadata for that file, right, for a particular file. So the metadata utility would go out and grab it, but it would grab 2025, which meant there still wasn't 2024 metadata in there. We were able to work around that in the short term, like for the states that were piloting files and doing things like that, or if we ran into a metadata issue like that. But we knew we needed to add some functionality to address that. And so that's this enhancement is now there is a year selection. So if you need to get metadata from a previous year for whatever reason, there is now a selector on that screen that allows you to pull up previous year's metadata if you need it. The improved UI reports is really a kind of a minor thing, but hoping it's helpful. There are a couple of reports in Generate, like assessments, for instance, school level membership, because of the amount of data that it has to pull and try to present in the UI. Those can take, 10, 15, 20 seconds to load to compile all of that data and then load it into the UI. And there was a concern that as it's sitting there and the screen obviously is not changing, nothing's happening, whether or not that the UI is locked up. Is the UI still functioning? So a loading icon was added so that you could see that there is actually something happening and work through some of those longer, larger files when you're trying to pull those in the UI. The last two are in the UI on the resources tab. So that's sort of what's open in the screenshot. So Travis, who's on here, and I'm not sure, there's Gina and Ruth. So for some of the states that work with them, they have been doing a ton of work on the generate documentation, and we're going to touch on a little bit of that in a few minutes. But so they've been doing a ton of work on the generate documentation that's in Getbook. So one of the things we did on our side is we actually created a link from the resources tab in the UI to the documentation. So now you've got a direct link if you're working on something, have a question. Hopefully, we've got some documentation out there that's going to help with that. So now you have a link directly from the UI into the documentation. And then the next bullet there is we highlighted documentation on the screenshot, but right below that is support. In the previous UI version, I think there was and I apologize because I might get this wrong, but there was one that said like CEDS resources, CIID resources. There were a couple of different links there. So another thing that the documentation team did is they took all of that information and put it into one support page in the generate documentation. And then that also includes like the generate email, if you need to email the generate team, the Discord information for joining Discord, which I would highly suggest for those of you that can and haven't yet. But basically now that one support link within the UI will take you to that page, which gives you all of the resources that are available in one place. So hopefully you can get the assistance you need faster and easier in one place. Those are the UI changes for this release. And if anybody has any questions about any of these, I'm not stopping on these individual slides, but if you have questions, like Liz said, you can come off mute and ask or throw it into the chat. And then general changes, these were fairly small. For the infrastructure, I'm not going to go into great detail on this one, but hopefully this will be enough. If you need more, please ask. I mentioned that new report process that will replace get count SQL over time, right? It currently handles those 218 through 226. That new process, relies on views to do a lot of the work where we previously did that with dynamic SQL code. What we did is we went ahead and created all of the views that are going to be needed to support all of the files. That way, we've got sort of the infrastructure in place to start doing that transition, right? We're not going to be able to transition, all of the files in a release or two just because of the amount of testing that's going to have to go into this. But we're sort of, building that infrastructure so that it's all there, and it makes it easier for us to do that transition. And then I think there's like some new SCID groups spinning up for a couple of different files. You also will have the option potentially using that new report migration process with some of that SCID work. Like if the group of states that's working on it wants to try to take that on. I think, again, we've got a group of states out there that have done it. So there you have some resources to reach out to for state folks that have used this new process, that are comfortable with this, well, hopefully comfortable with the new process. So you've got some resources out there. So for those, the ones that are taking on a new file, or if you're just taking on a new file for yourself and you want to sort of investigate that new report process, the infrastructure is in place for you to be able to do that. In the utilities, we have a utility that rebuilds indexes. For those of you that aren't aware, basically over time, indexes help the queries run more efficiently. So all of the queries, the insert queries, select queries, all of those. Over time, those indexes degrade and the performance degrades. And if they're left in long enough, and depending on the index, they can actually get to a point where they have a negative impact. Having an index is worse than not having one. So we have a utility out there that rebuilds the indexes. Previously, it only rebuilt all of the indexes for the staging environment, all of those tables. We added when you run the utility, it also rebuilds the indexes for the fact and dimension tables. So it'll make those run more efficiently as well. And then for the ETL documentation templates, because this is something that is obviously integral as you're going to start trying to take on a new file or work on, something new in your generate instance. We now have a much more concerted effort to any changes that we make in a release, we make sure we're documenting those, even if that entire ETL template, documentation template may need some additional updates, we're at least keeping those up with the changes that are coming with each release. So they're going to be more accurate, and then we can keep them hopefully appropriate for everyone that wants to use them. And then Sean had a quick question: how frequently? There isn't a sort of like standard measure, like, oh, you should run this every week or you should run it every month. If you're someone who does the ETL work, right, which obviously, Sean, I know you do, the time that I would suggest running it is if you start to see any performance issues. Like if you typically run migrations and they take 5 or 10 minutes, and then you realize, hey, I'm running migrations and they're taking 15 minutes now, and they didn't before, I would run rebuild indexes. There may be times where you're going to want to run it, more frequently, or there may be times where you may not have to run it for quite a while. A lot of it just depends on how much data is flowing through it, basically, how much that index is having to do. So it's going to vary. Right? If you only hit it a couple of times, that index is going to is going to perform very well for a longer time. But if you're like in a heavy development cycle, maybe on a new file, right, where you're going to be hitting it a lot because you're, writing your ETL, migrating, and then going back and tweaking and migrating again and tweaking, and you're, going through that iteration, you might have to rebuild it more frequently, but there isn't a standard. I hope that non-answer answered it. Okay, so generate documentation. I sort of touched on this one briefly, and again, we have a team of folks that are working on this, and there's other of us that do some review work, but that team of 3 that I mentioned have just been doing some incredible work to get as much of this information out there. And so I do want to call out really quick. So through SLDS, there were some virtual PEN meetings where they got states together and we talked about this fact type documentation, which I'm going to show you, which is what's the first bullet. And so I really wanted to say thank you to those states that attended, because I was in those and I presented sort of what we were hoping to accomplish with this. And we got a lot of really good feedback from those states. So I really appreciate the time that you guys provided us. And we took the information that you provided, and I brought it back to the team. Oh, sorry, something popped up on my screen. But I took that information from those meetings and presented it back to the team. And I think they've done a good job of trying to incorporate as much of that feedback. So thank you to those states that were able to participate. So the fact type documentation, I'm going to show you. So this is the opening page for Generate, and I apologize because it's on my other screen, so I'm going to be not looking at this point, but the opening page to the Generate documentation looks like this. So if you go to Getting Started the easiest way, and then Migration over here on the left, and then there is Fact Types table, which describes the fact types. And then we have these individual fact type pages, which you can see this is what they've been able to put out. We originally had one, our prototype, the assessment one, and then they were able to create a child count one before those meetings. So that's what the states that participated were able to use as sort of their guide. But anyway, basically what these are, if you're not familiar, and I'm not going to go into great detail because we don't have time for that today, but basically what they are is each of the fact types, if you're going to work on, say, child count, right, there is a child count fact type that migrates 002 and 089. And I don't know which one I clicked on, so let me make sure. Okay. So basically what this is going to be is all the information if you were a state that was starting this file. So if you're a brand new state that's working on a file that's going to start on, say, child count or something like that, or you're an existing state that has done some files and you're going to pick up a new file. right? The idea is you can go to the fact type page that processes the file that you want to work on, or files that you want to work on. And it basically gives you all the information start to finish. So where do you begin if you're starting brand new on a file? What do you do? How do you get to the ETL documentation template? What other resources are available? What do I have to take into consideration as I'm getting ready to write my ETL? And then suggestions on writing ETL. That we don't go into a great deal of detail because obviously every state's going to be slightly different. But then how do you migrate the code? How do you validate the data once you've run the migration? How do you run the next step in the migration? How do you validate that? How do you validate totals? What utilities are available along the way? Because we built some utilities in SQL that are available in, through SSMS and the stored procedures. If you're not familiar, there is a utilities schema in the stored procedures that has all of the things that we've built up to this point. There is also a utilities page in the documentation that describes each of those and how to use them. But if there's a utility that would be particularly helpful at a stage in that process, we document that in here so that you can get to it. So we have these fact type pages out there. And again, we had started to develop these. We took the information from the PIN meetings and further enhanced them. And then we're going to be developing, I know they've got a few more in the pipeline that they've already kind of started working on, but we're going to have one eventually, this side, we're going to have one out here eventually for every fact type, which will cover every file. So eventually we'll have something out here to support every file that you have to submit. But this is a good start because we've got quite a few out here now. Does anybody have any questions about that before I transition back to the presentation? Okay. So yeah, then we'll go back to the presentation. And then this one is, well, it jumped back up to the top. So this one we wanted to touch on really quickly. So we've talked about this a couple of times and we've made a few announcements. Generate is now out on the open source, right, in the CIIDS Collaborative Exchange. I want to jump out here, so I'm going to share again, and hopefully I don't mess up the presentation this time. Go here. So if you're not familiar with it, this is the CIIDS Collaborative Exchange. There's a few projects out here that obviously have their work going on. We're going to go to generate. It's going to be a little slower for me, of course. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here is this is where all the code for generate is. So if you needed to get to anything, the web code is out here, plus all the database code is all out here. But what I wanted to show specifically today was we have the issues tab up here, which is where, as you're working on files, as you're doing any work within Generate, if you come across a problem, an issue may be trying to run a file, if you can think of some sort of enhancement that you want to, document, you want to say, well, hey, it would be nice if Generate did this or could do this. Anything at all that you come across, thanks, Candy. If there's anything in here that you come across that would be beneficial, right? Or like I said, an actual bug issue, you can go to the issues tab here, and then you can enter an issue. We have the new issue button over here. And what I wanted to show you was, again, Travis put quite a bit of effort into this one. So I wanted to show, we now have templates out here. So like for a bug report, if you were going to submit a bug report, you'll get a ticket that looks like this that already is templated to hopefully help you, fill in as much information as would be useful, because this could be something that we end up working on. It could be something that one of your, state partners picks up, and because they might be working on the same file, they might, want to look at that and see if it's something they can resolve. So the template helps you just fill in the information that's going to be relevant to a bug that you found in Generate. There is if you saw it, there is the blank one, which is just literally the blank template. You can use that one for anything else that comes up right now, but Travis does have, he's actually built a couple of other templates that we just haven't actually published yet, one for enhancements and one for documentation, right? So if you want to add, or if you want to suggest or add to the documentation, you can do that. And then there's also like, if there's an enhancement, either to the database side, anything there, or to the UI side, obviously you can enter an issue for that. And I did want to call out Kansas for this one. So we have all these issues out here, and we've got these tagged as 12.3, right? So you can actually go in and look at the issues that are part of the 12.3 release. So these are things that we worked on to be included in 12.3. And then we're going to have a whole set of issues out here for 12.4. We don't have those fully developed and marked out here yet, but there's going to be a whole set of these for 12.4. So you can go look and see what we are including in a particular release. These that are not tagged in that way are ones that were put in by, one of the states, somebody working on a file. But I wanted to call out this particular ticket, Greg in Kansas, because he actually found an issue in the generate code and put in the solution. So actually, this is one of those, like, a state finding an issue, figuring out what the solution to that issue was, and putting it out there for every other state to take advantage of if this happens to be something you were working on. So I just wanted to give him a shout out for that one. But again, so we've got the template out there now, the bug template. Those other two templates will be coming. And if you can think of anything else that would be useful, that like maybe there's a common template that would be useful, suggest that as well. Travis never has enough to do, so he would be happy to work on that. I think that's all I had for that. So I was going to go back to the regular presentation. And then I think here, quick review of 12.4. File updates, obviously, we're going to have anything in there that would apply to child count, membership, free and reduced lunch, 59, the staff file, and 129 CCD schools, I think that's the complete list for July. But we'll have anything that's required for those. We started working on, I don't know that we're going to be able to complete it in 12.4. Our target was always 13, which is the bigger release that we have every year. But we actually started on one of those sort of enhancements that we had been hoping to develop for a while, and finally we're able to put some time into, is actually in the UI, turning the numbers into links to show you the students that make up the aggregated counts from the UI. So we started that work. So we'll continue that work. Anything else we can come up with, obviously, that we can improve in the UI. Tool enhancements, that's always something we're looking at doing, is if there's a new tool that would be beneficial, or one of the existing ones that like we can in some way make better, or make it do more than it's currently doing. So we'll do any of that we can. And then we try to add validation rules for files with each release, so that when you're running a migration, the staging validation, when it runs, just more things that it can alert you to if there are potential issues with the data, anything that might be missing or anything that might cause a problem downstream. Just making you aware of those. That's what we're hoping to capture with those validation rules and the staging validation code. And that's the targets for 12.4. I think Liz is going to take over for this one.
Thanks, Johnny. Can you all hear me?
Yes,
okay, so this
yes.
is our, thank you. I had to switch. I was just on regular speakers, but my kids are home for their spring break and they are being crazy downstairs. So I switched over to my noise canceling headphones. Okay. All right. So our upcoming release calendar. So as you all know, in March, we'll be releasing 12.3, which is what Johnny just reviewed. He said some of those other upcoming 12-4 pieces, we're scoping that out for May, likely middle to end of May for that, and those will be targeting the July files. Then we will do our bigger release. Like Johnny said, this is where incorporating different pieces, if there's any CEDS edits that we have to do, any bigger UI updates. So like Johnny mentioned, that student level detail, specific testing improvements that we include and work on throughout the year. And then, like Johnny said, any new tools or utilities that we can incorporate into the tool as well. So that will be later this summer. Then for the other two, as you can see there, they have an asterisk next to them for October and November. These are potential release dates, just meaning that they could be changed. Also, some of our CIID funding could be edited at that point with option years coming up. So again, just those dates could change. It could look a little bit different. More to come on that when we know more. But for those, that would be the 13.1 and 13.2 releases, and targeting those for January and February. We always usually focus on assessments, personnel exiting, and discipline for those. Again, as most of you know, we try and target about 8 weeks out from when they open up in EdFax, when the files open up in EdFax, so that you all have time to submit and test and make sure that the files are accurate. So that is our upcoming release calendar. Any questions there? And so this is, like I mentioned at the beginning of the session, this is our evaluation. Travis actually just implemented where you can go ahead and click directly on that link right now, and it should take you right to the evaluation. So you don't even have to wait for us to throw it in the chat or whatnot. You should be able to access it right away. Again, we do use the information to make improvements to the sessions. So if you could just take a few minutes and do it, like I said, it really is beneficial for our team. Thanks, Travis. And he threw the link in the chat if you need it there as well. And then that's really the end of our meeting today. So really, this is a time, if there's any specific questions or if you guys want to chat about anything specific that you heard today, our team will stay on and answer any questions or concerns. So yeah, really opening it up to you all. Well, we will leave the session up just for a few more minutes in case anything pops up. You can feel free to reach out to any of us with, like I said, any questions or concerns. We're happy to help. Johnny, I saw you came off mute. Do you have anything?
No, I was just going to say I'm staying on. So if somebody does have a question and they want to hang around and ask it, I will be on.
I actually have a question about the metadata.
Okay.
Can you clarify when you say it's pulling down the metadata, where is that? Because there's a few different definitions of metadata in what I do. So I wanted to get a clarification of that.
Okay, so generate depends heavily on the metadata, the file specification metadata, because that's how we did build the submission files. That's how we know which, category sets apply to which files, what levels a file is submitted at, for instance. So all of the metadata that I'm talking about when I say that, or when I mentioned that previously, is on the file specification itself. And that's what we're pulling down and storing in generate tables. And then we refer to it in a couple of different places. We use that metadata in a couple of different processes within generate.
And that's coming from EdPass?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm, because there was some confusion in my organization about versus the metadata that we input for EdPass for our specific files. So yeah.
Is that like the state supplemental survey, that one? I think that's what it used to be called. In generate, it's called toggle. The information, like your child count date, your specific child count date, or your
yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that metadata is separate. Yes, we are not talking about that one. I apologize because metadata is such a broad term now.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm. So thank you.
Sure. There was something that popped, a couple of things popped up. I am not good at following the chat, so let me look real quick.
So Dawn said, I would like to schedule a time next week to discuss issues with our exiting reports. Johnny, that's probably for you. And then
Absolutely, yeah.
Jiao Cheng put, would you kindly go back from slides 1 to slides 5? That's the part I missed. And we will send the slide deck out so you have access to it. But if you want to go back real quick, I think we have like some agenda slides. Yeah, so that's just the first one. The second one is our agenda.
That's a wasted slide.
And then these are just some of the summary of changes. Like I said, this recording will be posted along with the slides as well. Okay, Ollie put in the deck. Where do we get the blank.back file mentioned in the installation guide? We added a
Let me
link there,
look at
Johnny.
that. Yeah, I clicked on it to see. I know there are cookies. Thank you. Let me search for that. I am not seeing on that page, I'm not seeing the word blank. Where do you see that, Holly? So hopefully it's not a link that was supposed to have something, and for whatever reason, the link isn't working, so it came through as blank. Okay, let me look. It is slow loading. Oh, okay. Sorry. When you said, yeah, I apologize. When you said blank dot back, I thought there was actually something in the text that said blank dot back. I was like, that's got to be something we missed. So no, if you are, for whatever reason, if you need a backup version of Generate, just reach out through any of those support methods to us. We can get you, like if you need a specific backup, if you need to go to 12.2 or 12, like in this case, 12.3, when it comes out, we can get that to you.
Is that meaning, John, just email it to Generate Help?
Yeah, any one of those methods, like, because I know you're active in Discord. If you want to send something in Discord, you could send something through the Generate Help, because that's actually a monitored box that multiple people check, and then they can get it to us. Or, like I said, any of those methods that works for you. But yeah, if you reach out, we can get you a specific backup, any of those that you might need. And if you're installing a new version, we can get you the most recent version.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then for the question about slides 1 through 5, if anybody else doesn't have any questions, was there something specific you wanted to know, or is it just that you missed that part? Yes, absolutely. You can ask any question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So hi, Johnny. It's great that you can bring out so much contents. So I'm a Louisiana data coordinator, beginning from 2023.
Okay.
So this might sound very absurd to you, but my previous experience is most majorly with the AdFacts, AdPass, and DMS. Those are really old databases.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
And I was never a IDEA Part B manager, right? So
Right.
I want to ask, this platform you have here, CIID, and also Generate here, is the first time I saw the entire system today. So I want to ask, like, what's their correlation with AdFacts, and how are non-IDEA files involved from now on in this platform?
Well, first off, welcome to the community. Glad you're
Thank
here.
you.
So yeah, so CIID is the Center for the Integration of IDEA Data. So it was specifically for special education data. So that was our primary focus, which that's why we have the slides broken up that way with the IDEA and the non-IDEA and so on. But basically what Generate is an application that standardizes the processing of your data to create those submission files that you have to put into EdPass, so the part that you're familiar with. The
Right.
Generate application will take your source data, migrate it through the process, and create that submittable file that you need to go into EdPass. And it does all of the IDEA files. Those have been submitted by multiple states. And obviously, we still have states, like I mentioned, if you were on in the beginning, we still have states that are obviously working through these and that are helping us, refine that code if we happen to find a bug. So all of the IDEA files work through there. There are quite a few of the non-IDEA files that work through Generate currently that states have submitted using Generate and the Generate file to submit through EdPass. And then there are others that we've developed the code for, but no state has actually attempted that. And so if you hear us or if you see anywhere us talking about a pilot opportunity file, that's what that is for us. That means we have the code in place, but no state has actually attempted that file yet. Like I mentioned in the beginning, New Mexico took on several of those in this past submission window. But those are ones where, like, if you choose to work on one of those, like you may come across some bugs in the migration code or things like that because it hasn't been fully tested in a state yet with state data. It's only been validated like internally with our test data. So that's the difference between the files that have been submitted. But bigger picture, Generate is meant to be an application that will submit all of the files to EdPass. That's the goal. Some of them still require some work, like I said, the pilot opportunity ones, but all of your special education files can go through there and quite a number of the non-special education ones.
So what's the difference between, so I was responsible of the generation of several IDEA file from that, I think last school year, 23rd to 24th.
Right.
So what's the difference between the approach to just submit it to EdPass? I'm sorry, first upload to EdPass and see the business rule failures and data quality errors and try to understand that from BRSI and fix that on our end. So that's one approach, right? The good old way. And I suppose there is another way, is to do it through Generate, right? So right now, those two ways are equivalent, you're saying?
Well, I think the benefit of, so if you have, obviously every state here has a legacy process where they worked on those files, right? So they had a process in place to move their data and create a submission file that they could, like you said, right, that would pass all the checks, all the BRSI checks, and was submitted. The benefit of Generate is it standardizes that process, right? So everybody is doing the same thing, which then means, you can lean on the community. One of the other benefits of that is it like one of the things that Generate has done in a few states is it will sometimes expose issues with data that you can go back and address with sometimes districts and schools and things like that. It can expose those things for you. Sometimes like there's different interpretations of file specifications, like what a file specification is asking for. Generate helps to standardize that as well, because as new states come in and take on a file, if they have a different interpretation, we get clarification on that and determine like how that file is expected to be submitted, and then Generate's can handle that for you. And then the other, I think, probably bigger advantage is we've got all the validation and things in place, which you obviously are going to have those in your state as well. But like when a file specification changes, like the biggest one I can think of is like assessments a couple of years ago. And if you weren't an EdFacts coordinator then, there were pretty significant changes to assessments, right? The file
Right.
specifications themselves and like the layout, the actual layout of the files and the logic behind them. Well, Generate does all that work, right? So that's not something that your team has to then take on, like your development team. It's hard for me to say because there are some places where one person does everything, and then there's others where there's teams. So whoever would generally be maintaining that process, right? That's not something you have to take care of because Generate is going to make those changes. Generate is going to take care of any changes to category sets, permitted values that change year to year. Obviously, any file specification changes like that assessments one, that one was big compared to most of the files that change. But that's another advantage of Generate is that it's going to do all of that work for you. So you don't have to worry about the maintenance of handling file specification changes year to year.
So if I'm understanding it right, so as states, as SEAs, we can download Generate to our local computers, and there's just because you said that it will take care of every kind of changes, updates, differences in file specs, suspecting that Generate is actually taking the student level data to
Yes, that is one of the things that and this is probably, if I'm understanding your question right, this usually comes across in staff, right? A lot of the states for the staff files were receiving aggregated, like the data was pre-aggregated when the state received it.
Right.
That is not something that would go through Generate, right? Generate is expecting to take the student granular level data and then migrate it through into the data warehouse, which that's another advantage of Generate, I believe, right? So when it goes into the data warehouse, you have all of this data available to you year over year for that, all of that student information that you can then also leverage for state reporting, any additional reporting you want to do, because you're loading up that data warehouse with all of that information as well. But yes, Generate is expecting to receive granular student and staff level data in order to process a file. So if it's something you receive pre-aggregated, that's not something that would go through Generate, if that's what you were asking.
Right. Okay, I got one last question. So
Sure.
So I'm supposing that because I'm also kind of like a database DBA, database administrator. So
okay.
So is it true that the infrastructure of the ETL pipeline in Generate is very similar, or I would say almost identical to any common Microsoft SQL database or Oracle kind of database?
It's
SQL
SQL
type.
Server. Yeah,
it's a SQL Server. Okay.
And that code is written in SQL. And I will say that the reason that decision was made is because as we were looking at the environments, like when Generate was created, this is pre-me, but when Generate was being developed and the idea of Generate is because most states are already going to have that expertise in-house. Right. We didn't want to develop it in a way that okay, if the state wanted to pick up Generate, you have to go hire someone who has a particular right, or train up someone on your staff. Every state's already going to have SQL developers, SQL DBAs. So yeah, it's the back end of Generate is SQL.
All right. Sounds good. I guess I still have a lot to catch up in this area, but whatever you share is a really good, precious contribution to my domain knowledge here with this powerful tool. Thank you so much, John.
Well, I appreciate you joining the call today. And they're like the Generate documentation we have out there that I mentioned in here, and it's in the slide. There's a lot of good information out there about Generate. This group is a really good resource because these are folks that have been working in Generate and have done a lot of this stuff and have probably encountered the things you're going to come across. So, lean on the community as well. Obviously, we'd be happy to help you. So.
Okay, awesome. And then Ollie, I just saw that chat you put in there. Yes, I will put a few of our email addresses in there. And then I don't know, Johnny, if you want to stay on with them and kind of work through those things. But if there's no other questions, I think we can drop. Thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody.